Towson, Baltimore, of mights and could-be's and fake football and all of that, as we now have two more left. The Bills in town this week. Luke Jones will be out on the backfields of Owings Mills. I will be joining him this week to investigate all things purple, as this is the third and always important preseason game. And I know Ryan Mallett will be slinging it on Saturday night against the Buffalo Bills. But, Luke, many, many questions for this football team as we're now inside of 3 weeks of the Bengals, right?
Yeah, it's really an interesting juxtaposition as far as looking at the defense compared to the offense. I mean, you think of the third preseason game, as you said, it's kind of the dress rehearsal. You're in that fine-tuning mode of the summer where you're trying to get, you're trying to put everything, put a bow on everything, so to speak, from a preparation standpoint. Not that you're game planning your opponents. You do a little bit of that for the third preseason game, and it kind of varies team to team how much of it you do. But everything's installed, all your different packages on each side of the ball, and you're trying to fine-tune. You're trying to sort out any position battles you have, all of that. And the defense, they're on schedule in terms of that. You'd like to see Marlon Humphrey on the field, and, of course, he's missed a couple practices. It appears, John Harbaugh said it was a soft tissue issue that he had prior to the game. He only played a few snaps. It's pretty clear that he suffered a setback, and usually soft tissue is code for hamstring, as I've covered John Harbaugh now and I've heard him use different terminology.
You're an interpreter. You're the Harbaugh interpreter.
Yeah, Harbaugh-ese or something like that. But so that's been disappointing. But beyond that, this defense is in really good shape, and the results kind of speak for themselves. Now, you got to see it translate. You got to see these young guys who have played well in the summer do it when they kick it off for real in Cincinnati in a few weeks. But you feel good about where the defense is. On the flip side, the offense, and you've already talked about it, Ryan Mallett continues to be the quarterback with Joe Flacco still not practicing. We know he's not going to play in this third preseason game. But even beyond that, and I'm not trying to be dismissive of that because that is a big deal. Otherwise, all this talk about practice doesn't matter then because you do have to prepare. And that is going to be a point of concern, a point of emphasis, a microscope, so to speak, as far as how rusty Joe Flacco is going to be, and knowing that he hasn't had much time with Jeremy Maclin whatsoever, let alone some other guys that you'd like to continue to build rapport with. But I think you just look at this offensive line, and they're still very much in the kind of mode of what is it going to look like come week one? What is it going to look like come week 5? And it's really a major question right now. I mean, a couple pieces. We know Marshall Yanda's going to be at right guard. We assume, even though he's banged up right now, that Ronnie Stanley's going to be at left tackle, and you're hoping that he continues what he did in the second half last year. But beyond that, you got some significant questions. We think Austin Howard's going to be the right tackle. That was the plan, but he's got to show more than he did against Miami. I did not think that was a very good performance for him. And it was his first performance. And
he's a veteran guy who's been in the league. Maybe he's not taking the second preseason game as seriously as we are in grading him, but he's got to be – I agree with you. He better be better than that once the whistle blows in Cincinnati, right?
Right. And I'm not saying he's at the top of the list, but there was a reason why Oakland let him go. He was higher priced, and they had someone that they felt could do just as good of a job, if not a little bit better. So I think those three positions you feel okay about. You feel great about Yanda. Assuming he's healthy, you feel great about Stanley. And I think you feel okay about Austin Howard for now if we're going to give him the benefit of the doubt, which is all you can kind of do right now because there really isn't anyone else because you're trying to sort out what's going to happen at center and left guard. Now, I think Ryan Jensen's been solid in the preseason. I think if there's one encouraging development on the offensive line, it's been that he's looked okay. Now, I don't think you're going to be confusing him with Matt Burke anytime soon, but I think he has shown the signs that you've wanted to see where it's been steady there.
Well, they wanted Urschel to be that guy 3 weeks ago, right?
Well, see, it was going to be one of those two. They were in a legitimate competition. I think it was going to be a very serious competition. I don't think it was a case where John Urschel was just going to be the starting center automatically. I think there was going to be a competition. But this becomes a little more complicated now because of the loss of Alex Lewis. And then what do you do at left guard? right now, James Hurst is listed as the first-team left guard, but with Alex Lewis's injury, keep in mind, James Hurst is also the swing tackle, left tackle and right tackle. He's the primary backup. So what do you do there? Do you leave Hurst at left guard? Thinking he probably can do an okay job there, even though we haven't really seen him there, but most tackles can shift inside and will typically be a little more effective at guard. That's usually how it works. But we don't know that for sure. But if he's doing that, then how many reps is he getting at the tackle positions? And we just said, you and I both have some initial concern about Austin Howard, even if it's not a major concern just yet. And as much as I love Ronnie Stanley as a player, this is the second straight year now he's missed some time with injury, and hopefully this isn't something that that lingers as we get closer to the regular season.
We haven't mentioned Perryman yet, or any of the other sort of candidates for that club, right?
Right. But that interior line that's been ravaged by losses since the start of camp because of the Urschel retirement, because of the Lewis injury, because Nico Siragusa, their fourth-round pick, who at the very least looked like he was going to be one of their primary backups on the interior line. He's lost for the year. So you get what you saw on Thursday night, which was Matt Skura starting at left guard, who was on the practice squad last year, and Jared Pugsley, who's a third stringer, and even me, one of the few that's out there watching practice every single day, even I was surprised to see him starting at right guard on Thursday night. So what did the Ravens do? They bring back their old friend Jeremy Zuda, who they got rid of back in March because they wanted to get bigger and stronger at the center position.
It's always interesting when a guy comes back like that, right? Especially after – it's one thing coming back 5 years later like Rafael Palmeiro or whatever.
Right.
And it might have been different if Bolden would have come back this time around. But, boy, when you come back like 5 minutes after they said we don't want you anymore, that's got to be awkward, dude. It's just got to be.
On the heels of another team, and let's face it, the 49ers are not a good football team. They didn't want him either. And, how much of that is there a decline even from last year? I mean, we don't know. I mean, he's only been on the practice field a couple days for the Ravens. They didn't give him big money or anything, certainly. But what do you do there? Now, I understand them bringing him back. They clearly needed to add another veteran to the interior depth that they have right now, because there just isn't enough depth there. I mean, even if you buy into Matt Skura, which I do know they like him, I think he has had his moments, although he struggled on Thursday night.
Well, they must like him to get him on the field in a preseason game.
They do, but at the same time, I don't think they were looking at him to be their primary, their first reserve interior lineman. So you bring in Zuda, and what does that mean? John Harbaugh said on Saturday, which isn't a surprising answer, and I don't know how much I truly buy it, but he implied that it's going to be a competition at center between Jensen and Zuda, because the thought is if you do put Jeremy Zuda back in as your starting center, you can shift Ryan Jensen to left guard, and that's probably your best internal option at left guard at this point. But you got rid of Jeremy Zuda 5 months ago because you wanted to get better at that position, and now you're going back to him. And I don't think the blocking schemes now, which are more downhill, which more manpower, they're not doing the stretch zone like they did with Kubiak and how they were trying to continue that. And remember, Jeremy Zuda was brought in the same year as Gary Kubiak with that thought in mind. So I don't think it's a great scheme fit to have him as your starting center. So you either go with him as your starting center and you move Jensen to left guard, or you say, okay, Jeremy Zuda is going to be a backup, but the problem is, I don't think, it's questionable whether he's a good enough center at this point. I'm not sure they really view him as, being a physical guard. And even Harbaugh said on Saturday that they would kind of view him as a center and emergency kind of guard. I guess you could think about it from a context of Jensen could be your starting center. James Hurst is at left guard, and we'll just use his name for right now. And if you have an injury to either Hurst or Yonda, you could shift Jensen to guard, and then you bring Zuda into place.
This is not ideal, dude. You're playing a shell game here. I mean, literally.
I know, and I was just going to make that point. I was talking to another member of the media about this very topic over the weekend, that when you're talking about these scenarios, and we're still 3 weeks from the start of the season.
And your quarterback isn't standing?
Yeah, I mean, this sounds like Week 13 kind of stuff when, you're really hurting. You've had a couple guys lost for the season. You have a couple guys that are going to be out, and you're just trying to make it through. We've seen these scenarios where Marshall Yanda kicks out to right tackle, and Yanda's really good at right tackle too. But your ideal scenario is him playing guard. We've seen scenarios where Alex Lewis kicked out the left tackle last year. That wasn't ideal. But when you're talking about these kind of scenarios and you haven't even played a real game yet, that's why it's so concerning. And we know the Ravens typically don't have a great offense. I mean, that's part of their DNA. As much as they talk about their DNA being great defense, the Super Bowl year Flacco's Super Bowl year notwithstanding, this offense rarely is an offense that scares other teams. I mean, we just know that. But the Flacco thing is bad enough, and then when you couple that with what this offensive line looks like right now, it is, as you said, it's a shell game. It's a who's who. It's trying to figure out who's lining up where, and they've had, to this point in the preseason, the only position that has been stable in terms of who's been working there in stacking practices and preseason games is Ryan Jensen at center. And now we're talking about the possibility of him moving to guard if in fact they decide to do that. So it's very unsettling. It's very concerning. I mean, it's not where you want to be when you're getting to this point. It's one thing if you're talking about these kind of things in the spring. It's one thing if you're talking about these kind of things at the start of free agency when you lose a couple.
But this is dress rehearsal week.
But, I mean, they're going to be playing, 3 weeks from now, we're going to be talking about week one, whether it's another loss in Cincinnati or whether it's pulling off what might kind of feel like an improbable win given the state of their offense right now.
I can't look at this right now and say, I think they're going to win in week one. I mean, I don't even know who the hell's going to be on the field. Neither do they, apparently, right?
Right. I mean, and as much as you want to believe and have confidence that Flacco's going to be out there, I still go back to the wording from the release that they put out the day after the preseason opener, where it said the plan is for him to be on the field week one. And at this point, considering they didn't sign Colin Kaepernick or they haven't brought in another real quarterback, and okay, maybe Thad Lewis, maybe I'm selling him a little bit short there, but I still don't look at him as a serious threat to Ryan Mallett. And Ryan Mallett's been bad. I mean, there's nothing about his play that's been inspiring this summer. I'm not going to try to say that it suggests otherwise, but the fact that they didn't pull the trigger on Kaepernick or bring in another higher profile quarterback, let's say, leads you to believe that you would hope that they're right about this thing with Flacco, and they're being extra cautious, and the back's not going to even be an issue after he practices and plays a few weeks and seems to be fine. But until we see that, how can you not be skeptical? I mean, originally they were saying they hoped he was only going to be out a week, and we're going on close to 4 now. So it's really unsettling, and you're trying not to be Chicken Little. You're trying not to say the season's over, and it's not. Things could still be okay. As much as I don't love the ceiling for this offense, even all things being considered. You'd like to think that they can still play up to at least being an average kind of an offense.
But every time the defense is on the field, you could feel like 3 and out. And I don't know if they're going to take the ball away, but I think they're going to take the run game away from a lot of teams.
Yeah, but and this goes back to what I talked about in the off season. I know we continue to talk about how the defense played at the very end of last season, and that's legitimate. They were not good, and they lost Jimmy Smith, and their secondary collapsed. And I think they are better equipped to survive a Jimmy Smith injury. And if you have to bet right now, Jimmy Smith will probably miss a few games at some point. It's kind of who he is, and I don't think.
Well, you'd say that about Stanley. You'd say that about Perryman at this point.
But as much as we look at those final few games, keep in mind, the reason why this team was 8-6 going into Pittsburgh was much more about the fact that they had a top 10 defense than an offense that was below average and kind of really bad in certain categories. So my point with that is, yes, I think the defense will be better. Yes, I think it can be a darn good unit, but it was pretty good last year. And my point is, I don't know how much higher that ceiling gets on the defensive side of the ball to help make up for what could be some very serious growing pains early in the season. So on the offensive side, so that's where I look at this thing, and I've talked to you a little bit about this, and we'll talk about it more as we get closer to it. But first month of the season at Cincinnati, home against Cleveland, no worries there until the Browns suggest make us feel otherwise.
You think Ryan Mallett could beat the Browns, do you?
Yeah, I think Ryan Mallett could beat the Browns at home. Maybe in Cleveland might be a different story, but you go to London for the Jacksonville game, and the London games are always weird. You know that. I mean, regardless of the fact that we're excited to go, because it's the first time the Ravens have been there, and we're taking a lot of people over there and everything. The actual football, who knows?
Well, the Jaguars know how to do it. They've done it enough, right?
Yeah, and I mean, their quarterback situation's a disaster right now, but the Ravens came close to losing in Jacksonville last year. So you have those 3 games, and then you come home to play Pittsburgh on what will amount to pretty much being a short week when you take into account getting back to Eastern time when you're in London for several days. And so this first month of the season doesn't set up well.
Can't be 1-3, dude.
That's what I'm saying.
1-3.
And then you go to Oakland.
Yeah.
So, and we're getting ahead of ourselves. I understand that.
Yeah, but we're allowed to do that. I mean, what the hell else are you going to talk about, the Bills?
Right. Are we going to talk? Yeah, are we going to talk about Ryan Mallett and an offense that's been scary to watch so far? But my point is, it's kind of a challenging start if all things are being equal. But if you're having to knock off some significant rust, whether you're talking Flacco, whether you're talking about lack of cohesion on the offensive line, that's a scary thing. That's a scary proposition. So, you'd like to see them. I don't know what they're going to accomplish on the offensive side of the ball against Buffalo on Saturday that's really going to make you feel better. It's kind of tough. I guess maybe if they really get the running game going. I mean, let's face it, they haven't exactly opened up a ton of running lanes. I mean, Terrence West, who hasn't had a big workload, but 1.9 yards per carry. Buck Allen, who I think has run hard, but 3.4 yards per carry. As a team, and I don't really care that much about team-wide preseason stats because so many guys that aren't going to be on the roster, but the team's yards per carry in the preseason, 3.4. And there's a major point of emphasis with Greg Roman being hired. So you'd like to see the running game at the very least kind of get going on Saturday, but beyond that, I mean, I don't know what you're going to see in the passing game that, even if Ryan Mallett goes out and plays better, okay, great, but you still don't want him playing. You want it to be Flacco, and you want Flacco to be firing on all cylinders and being healthy and looking.
Boy, the whole firing all cylinders and stuff, that feels really far-fetched at this point.
Oh, sure, and that's my whole thing. So, it's just, I guess, first and foremost, you pray no more injuries, and Danny Woodhead and Marlon Humphrey, clearly 2 guys that were banged up in that Miami game, as we've learned a couple days later, but they just have so many other players that are banged up and trying to figure out exactly what this offense is going to look like, offensive line, fullback. I mean, it's just a tight end position. There's just, and then your quarterback. So, other than that, everything's fine on the offensive side of the ball, right?
Yeah, sort of, but at least we can talk about the defense in glowing terms. Hey, any thoughts on the Bills coming in here this week, or just in the general vein of preseason football, that what we're going to see from them? And I'll be talking to people up there this week. A lot of these other organizations actually have a quarterback under center, and they really are sort of taking it seriously. I looked at the Dolphins the other night. They stunk, and I gave them some praise going into the game, and I know a lot of it was backup and short field and all that stuff, but nobody wants to stink like that. And as much as we're all nervous about the Ravens, I'd be a lot more nervous looking at the Redskins or the Dolphins the last 2 weeks, because the Ravens won these games and going away, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't care so much about winning the games and going away. I mean, to me, you look at how your first team played it. I think it speaks very well for their depth on the defensive side of the ball that the second and third stringers have continued that. I feel really good about the defense. Even if there's still a couple questions there, I think Correa at inside linebacker, still think the pass rush, got to see these guys do it when the lights come on for real. But, to answer your question about Buffalo, I mean, what a weird offseason for them. I mean, you think about it. They fired their general manager right after the draft. They have made moves since the start of training camp with trading Sammy Watkins. They traded starting cornerback Ronald Darby. I mean, this is clearly a team that is looking to the future, and perhaps...
Well, they're de-Rexifying the place to some degree, right?
A new coach, obviously. Tyrod Taylor's the quarterback for now. And look, I think Tyrod can play in this league. I don't know where he ranks, but he's a lot better than a lot of other teams' starting quarterbacks right now.
And he's proven that since he left here.
Yeah. So, but I think it's interesting the timing then of the big news on Sunday night of Anquan Boldin announcing he's retiring. You do wonder if some of the moves they've made since the start of training camp, if there's something to that. And I know Boldin kind of downplayed the Sammy Watkins trade when he was asked about it recently. But you do wonder if he kind of said, why am I doing this? And I saw some people saying that he didn't look very good in the Bills' most recent game. And, I mean, he's old. Anquan Boldin wasn't exactly a burner when he was with the Ravens, and that's when he was 29, 30 years old. So this is a team in transition right now, and I don't think too many fans are all that terribly interested in the Bills. Preseason football, you kind of just focus on your own team, and you kind of just see who shows up. But what was interesting to see Anquan Boldin walk away. Excellent career. You're talking about a guy who I think 14th on the NFL's all-time receiving yards list. I want to say he is somewhere in that neighborhood of 9th or 10th all-time in catches in the NFL.
Third and 8 back shoulder, that's all that matters.
And I think back to the Super Bowl. He had the touchdown catch, but the play that probably saved the Ravens was his big catch on 3rd and 1 in the fourth quarter, where they were able to get that extra field goal to give themselves a 5-point lead. Was absolutely huge. But this Bills team definitely a team in transition, but definitely wanted to give a nod to Anquan Boldin, a man who was let go by the Ravens prematurely, and I'll never change my mind on that. And I know quite a few Ravens fans would agree with me.
I'm still upset about Nelson Cruz. And what else? What are the great upsets of Baltimore sports? Like, who else did we ship out too early that we're still mad about? And I don't know that you shipped Boldin out early. Hell, he was 34 or whatever.
Oh, they definitely. That was absolutely the wrong move. He had 2,000-yard seasons after that with San Francisco. But to answer your question,
with Colin Kaepernick, by the way, who's a backup.
Yeah, Boldin. And the only
we didn't have a job. I'm even wrong about that.
I tweaked the Ravens on Twitter about it a little bit. Steve Bisciotti still defended that trade back in January at the season-ending press conference, which I thought was bizarre and just wrong. But anyway, to answer your question, I think back to you mentioned Nelson Cruz here recently.
Well, Trent Dilfer, right? We're going to go to that.
You know what? It's interesting because I think about that all the time. At least in that case, I'll say the Boldin trade was worse because they did nothing to the wide receiver position.
Well, yeah, they upgraded the quarterback position by bringing Gurr back in. He had a better arm. He'd had a better season. All of that. Now, that didn't work, but with Boldin, it's not like they got rid of Boldin and brought somebody else in that didn't work, right?
It was an absolute failure. And, I remember writing the day of that trade, I said, this trade is an absolute loser now, but I'll give the Ravens the benefit of the doubt to see what they would do between then and training camp. Well, they didn't add any. They added Brandon Stokely, and I love Brandon Stokely, but that's not a replacement for Anquan Boldin. So, but to go back to your question about, I think, first of all, the Dilfer thing, that would have been akin to letting Dilfer go and just starting Chris Redmond the next year. I think that's what that would have been, as opposed to attempting to get Elvis Gerbach, and they would have been screwed with Dilfer as their quarterback if Jamal Lewis had gotten hurt just as he did.
Terry Allen.
Yeah, I think they would have been in trouble either way there. But I think back to Boldin. That's probably from a football decision standpoint, because I'd put the handling of the Ray Rice thing as the biggest mistake this organization's made, and that went beyond football. But if you're talking pure football moves, that one's probably at the top of the list as far as worst ones they've made. But I think
it's one of those ones. I remember where I was that night. I was at the Lyric, and they were screening the championship video. Remember?
Yeah, it was strange because remember they had some players. They had the purple carpet set.
Oh my God! Ed Reed and Ray Lewis had to answer questions about it. It was definitely strange. But I think back to the Eddie Murray trade. There's it's not a big list, fortunately, but
definitely some moves that you look back to in Baltimore sports lore and say, oh.
Hey,
like
bro, the Orioles brought back Glenn Davis this weekend. You can go home. You can go home.
And I'm glad for Glenn Davis to say, because he didn't want to come here and be terrible.
By the way, he was a good guy. He really was a good guy.
It was a warm reception. It wasn't over the top, nor should it have been, but he got a warm reception. I was glad to see that at least, because I was a little worried about that, quite frankly. But
how did that go this weekend, mixing football and baseball and old school stuff? Because I know you were part of that. Obviously, with my mom's death this week, I did not make it to the Hall of Fame luncheon. I'm disappointed. That was my team. That was the first team at Camden Yards, and I had a press pass. It was my 7th year of having a press pass, if you can believe that, at that time. I've now been banned for 12 seasons, but I remember all those guys. I remember that clubhouse. I remember where everyone's locker was in there, from David Segui and Rick Sutcliffe and Mark Williamson and Mike Flanagan, and Cheeto Martinez. They were all in there that year.
Yeah, that was the high. It wasn't the highlight of the weekend, because the Manny Machado walk-off grand slam was the highlight of the weekend for the Orioles, which there weren't many other highlights from a baseball standpoint, but it was fun. The highlight for me was seeing Sam Horn hit a couple over the out-of-town scoreboard. It just made me think back to 1992, and everyone thought Sam Horn would be the first one who really had a chance to hit the warehouse. And little did we know how impossible that task would actually be, other than maybe Ken Griffey Jr. hitting a juiced baseball.
Yeah, I was going to say, just juice the balls. We'll hit the warehouse.
Yeah, in the Derby. But to see Big Sam, who didn't win they did the little home run derby, and they had a rope set up to make it shorter, kind of old man home run, so to speak. Brady Anderson won the contest, but Sam Horn was the only one who hit 2 out. Brady hit one legitimate run out. Chris Hoyles hit one out over the 364 sign in left center. But Big Sam, who you'd be surprised. I mean, he was a big guy when he played, but he's the kind of guy you think 25 years later, you're wondering if he's 350 pounds, 400 pounds, or something like that. He was only a little bit bigger than he was as a player, and he can still hit the ball with some authority. But it was fun to see all those guys. A nice walk down memory lane. A team that doesn't get remembered as fondly as 1989, or will be remembered as fondly as 2012, as far as underdog teams that kind of came out of nowhere. But that was I think a 22-game improvement from 1991. That was a fun year, even though they couldn't beat out those hated Toronto Blue Jays.
Memories. We got football. We got baseball this week. Of course, the Orioles taking on the A's. Luke will be at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. We will be on the back fields of Owings Mills all week long, as well as the Ravens get ready for the preseason important game. It certainly won't be the New Orleans game next week. The third the dress rehearsal, the audition with Ryan Mallett. That happens against the Bills on Saturday night. We are WNST.net. He is Baltimore Luke on Twitter, and Luke at WNST.net finds him. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. Don't forget, if you're on our WNST text service, you get the breaking news first. Sometimes it's bad news, but it's always brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. We always get that to you first. And last but never least, our morning newspaper ships to your email inbox each and every morning at 7 a.m. That's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. The BuyAToyota.com audio vault there for anything you missed this week. We're going to be going all over the place, from Oakland to Boston and obviously Buffalo this week, and preparing for Orioles and Ravens games, as well as getting you ready for the NFL season with 2 weeks to go. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.